Panic at the Disco, Pierce the Veil, 21 Pilots, Black Veil Brides, and All Time Low over and over and over, except the months where they decided to put Awsten Knight on the cover. What's up, everybody? I'm Finn McKenty. This is the Punk Rock MBA, and today we are here to talk about alternative press. And just to be clear, despite the title of this video, which may seem kind of negative, I am a fan. I love AP. But with that said, I feel like something has been missing for maybe like the past 4 or 5 years. It went from being like the place that I and a lot of other people would go to find out about what was new and cool, to being like the same half dozen or so people on the cover over and over and over again, and the website was just kind of like the scene version of BuzzFeed. So what happened? Where exactly did AP go wrong? And can they ever make a comeback? I'll do my best to answer those questions in this video. But first, if you haven't, please subscribe and turn on notifications so you get all my videos. And also, I want to thank NordVPN for sponsoring this video. If you've ever wondered if you need a VPN, the answer is probably yes. Basically, what a VPN does is create a secure tunnel through the internet that encrypts all the data you send across that connection. And this is super important for security. Like if you ever use a public Wi-Fi connection at school, a coffee shop, or an airport, there really are people who hang out at those places and sniff your data trying to hack you, and a VPN will help protect you from them. It also allows you to virtually change your location, which means you can access content that's locked in your country. For example, if you want to watch a Netflix show that's only available in the UK, no problem. Just connect to a UK server and boom, there you go. And as you probably know, there's more and more tracking going on all over the internet, and with their CyberSec suite, you will make yourself a lot harder to track. And as a bonus, that also works as an ad blocker. So if you don't want Facebook and Google and YouTube and everyone else tracking you all across the internet, and they've got a special cyber deal. Every purchase of a 2-year plan will get you 1 additional month for free. Just go to the link in the description and use the coupon code PUNKROCKMBA at checkout.
I started my own zine so that I could call up somebody at the record company and try and find out so I could report it to the whole world about how unjust this was the Smiths didn't play Cleveland.
I personally first saw AP sometime in the mid-90s, but it had actually been around for several years before that. AP was created by Mike Shea in 1985 out of frustration with their local media that just wasn't covering the bands that he cared about. We were an alternative to The Scene, Plain Dealer, and WMMS, he said. Those are local Cleveland magazines and radio stations. But it grew from there into a real magazine, and by the mid-90s, they had really come into their own in terms of covering the alternative rock scene that was blowing up kind of in the wake of that whole grunge explosion of the early 90s. They did the first national cover stories on artists like 9 Inch Nails, Nirvana, Radiohead, My Bloody Valentine, and Foo Fighters, to name just a few. Those bands, of course, all ended up getting a ton of mainstream coverage, but AP was years ahead of the curve on covering all of them. And that is really what built the foundation of their brand. Which brings us to the next phase of AP's evolution, what I would call like the nu metal years.
Well, it's hard music. That's kind of like our music, you know what I mean?
This was their first pivot in kind of like the mid to late 90s, as grunge and alternative rock were starting to kind of run out of steam. And I give them a lot of respect for this, because they could have taken the safe path, stayed in their comfort zone, and just kept covering those same bands in the same scene, but they didn't, because their mission and vision was way bigger than that. I really like how Mike Shea put it here in this interview. Whatever the suburban rebellious music is at any time, that's what we're featuring. Our secret has been that we don't grow older with our readership. We stay consistently in that high school to early college demo. And in the late 90s and early 2000s, that was nu metal and post-grunge. And so they adapted. They had cover stories on Static X, Rob Zombie, and Slipknot, as well as some stuff that, you know, maybe didn't age quite so well, like Kid Rock, Puddle of Mud, and not 1, not 2, but 3 covers featuring Insane Clown Posse. Personally, I would call this the weakest era of the magazine, because it just didn't really seem like their heart was in the coverage of nu metal and ICP and whatever. But still, I give them credit for it, because they did what very, very few publications are ever able to do and stayed relevant through a changing of the guard. That is so difficult to do, and so I give them a ton of respect for pulling it off, even if it was a little bit rough here and there. Because it's one thing to have your finger on the pulse of one specific scene and be the person who documented that moment in time. So to do it more than once is truly an accomplishment. That tells me that's more than just dumb luck and being in the right place at the right time. That tells me that you have a vision. Which brings us to their second pivot. In the mid-2000s, they shifted their focus again to what I like to call the mall screamo scene. My Chemical Romance, Fall Out Boy, Chiodos, Paramore, all that stuff. And this is where I personally started paying a lot more attention to AP, because it was clear to me that what was happening in that mall emo scene was the next big generational shift in alternative culture. But unlike grunge or alternative rock, basically nobody in the music media was taking any of this stuff seriously. I mean, yes, you would see the occasional story in Rolling Stone about the very biggest bands like My Chemical Romance or Fall Out Boy that they just couldn't ignore because they were that big and they had to cover it. But I didn't get the sense that they really wanted to, and they certainly weren't interested in talking about bands that were any smaller than that, even relatively big ones like Taking Back Sunday and The Used that were hitting the Billboard Top 10. I didn't really personally like a lot of that stuff. I was a lot older than the target audience and it was a little bit too like whiny and angsty for me personally. But that is exactly why I wanted somebody to explain it to me, because I could see that it was important, but I didn't quite get it. So I was looking for somebody to explain it to me, and nobody was documenting it better than Alternative Press did. I remember reading their 100 Bands You Should Know issue every year, like really looking forward to that, because they really were 100 bands that you needed to know. They also knew that they had a younger audience, and I think did a really good job of bringing them up to speed with the roots of the genre. For example, they had that Oral History of series, like they did one about Lifetime. And by this point, AP basically felt like a completely different magazine than it did 10 years ago, where it was all about stuff that I found kind of boring, like college rock and grunge. And I'm sure there are some people who didn't like that and wanted it to stay what it was. But as somebody who wanted to be informed about the new generation of the scene, that was exactly what I was looking for. And then they even took it one step further when they created the AP Tour in 2007, which ran for, I think, 5 years and had bands like All Time Low, Circus Survive, Mayday Parade, Bring Me the Horizon, and The Ghost Inside, among many, many others. First of all, it was just like a really cool tour that they put together. And second, it was important because this meant that they weren't just documenting the scene, they were actively helping to create it by putting these tours together.
Fondly remember AP Tour, felt like very impactful, felt like there was such an energy around it.
Which brings us to the next phase of their evolution, what I would call the scene years. This was their next big pivot and what I think was the peak of Alternative Press from somewhere around like 2009 to 2015 or so. They certainly weren't the only outlet covering the scene. There was also like Substream, Outburn, Rock Sound, and probably a few others I'm not thinking of, plus the online outlets like Absolute Punk and Property of Zack. But I think it's safe to say that AP was the top of the food chain. Like if you were a metalcore or pop punk band, getting an AP cover was as big as it got back then. And so if I had to point to like one moment in time that was their peak, I would say it was probably like 2014 to 2015. This is when scene bands like Of Mice and Men, Bless the Fall, and Memphis May Fire were hitting the Billboard Top 10, when Warped Tour was drawing like 500,000 kids a year, and Alternative Press rode that wave. They got up to almost 250,000 copies of each issue printed, with 70,000 of those being to subscribers. They had distribution in Barnes & Noble and Target, all these other like huge mainstream retailers, and that put them as the #2 music magazine in all of North America, second only to Rolling Stone, which I would say is only arguably a music magazine at that point. So you could make the case that AP was the #1 music magazine in the country. They were really just firing on all cylinders, and it was cool to see. Now I am admittedly biased because they did a little profile of me back then, one of those Know Your Lifer features when I was at my old company Creative Live, which was really cool, huge honor to be included in the magazine. So maybe I'm biased, I don't know, but I honestly sincerely think that this era of AP was the best music magazine that I've ever seen in my life. And the other big thing here was the APMAs, the Alternative Press Music Awards.
Welcome to the Alternative Press Music Awards, what we like to call the Hot Topic Oscars.
This was like the scenes version of the Grammys. It really felt like a headline-worthy cultural event for the scene that I don't think I've seen happen before or since. The APMAs were largely put together by a guy named Josh Bernstein, who had previously done the Golden Gods Awards for Revolver, which were very cool, and they managed to hire him, and I think basically just said, hey, that thing you did for Revolver, come do that for us in our genre. And he did. I went to the first 2 APMAs in 2014 and 2015 because I was able to convince my previous company, Creative Live, to sponsor the APMAs, and it just felt really special, especially the second one in 2015. It was at the Quicken Loans Arena in Cleveland, which is where like the Cavs play. There was like 10,000 people there, I think. There was a red carpet with like people doing interviews and taking photos. They had performances by Weezer, All Time Low, Black Veil Brides, and Panic at the Disco, and a bunch more huge bands. I think like Rob Zombie and Run from Rum DMC were there. Absolutely everybody in the industry, like anything remotely related to like Warped Tour, everybody was there. It was broadcast live on Access TV. It was really cool. It felt like a big deal in a way that I never thought this kind of music could. Like there were all these people and sponsors and industry people here for this music that nobody else took seriously. But the fact that all this came together around it proved that those people were wrong.
It is being broadcasted in HD. Do not forget that.
That's right. That means that tonight is one of the only nights that you will see us wearing more makeup than Motionless in White.
Which brings us to the next section, the decline. To say that it all fell apart would be a little bit dramatic. That would be an overstatement. But clearly something did happen. I don't know if there's something behind the scenes or what, but they clearly lost a step after that. Josh Bernstein left in, I think, 2016. They stopped doing the APMAs in 2017. The magazine got a lot smaller, like physically smaller and with less pages. And AP as a brand just kind of felt a lot less relevant than it did even a couple years earlier. And of course, part of that has to do with the overall decline of print media, but that wasn't a new thing. That had been going on for years and years, even during the period where they were flourishing, so I don't think that was it. And the demise of Warped Tour definitely didn't help because they were so closely tied to that tour. But the larger issue that I think is kind of the fundamental driver of all of this is that it feels like they just kind of lost touch with the scene. Again, I want to quote the founder, Mike Shea. I think the trick when you're an editor is to realize that clocks move forward and you have to take a step back and put them in the background a little bit and make sure that you're trying to stay on top of what's going on now. And ironically, I think that is exactly what they failed to do. This was the first time that I think they really missed a changing of the guard. Alternative culture had kind of moved on from the scene bands, but they just kept putting that same rotating cast on the cover. Panic at the Disco, Pierce the Veil, 21 Pilots, Black Veil Brides, and All Time Low over and over and over, except the months where they decided to put Awsten Knight on the cover. Shout out to Awsten, by the way. I love him on Waterparks. And there's nothing wrong with any of those artists, but that gets old fast. And more importantly, with the exception of Waterparks, those were all like pretty much legacy artists at that point. Not exactly the kind of hungry, up-and-coming new artists that AP really built their brand on. If you look back over the past 6 or 7 years, you'll see that they pretty much completely missed the boat on the whole new next generation of alternative culture, which was emo rap, trap metal, and hyperpop. In my opinion, they should have had Lil Peep, Juice WRLD, XXXTentacion, Lil Uzi Vert, Suicide Boys, Ghostmane, and all those other artists on the cover way earlier. Or in the case of a lot of them, they never even made it into the magazine at all. As far as I'm aware, Lil Peep's first cover was in November of 2018, which was a year after he had died. Ghostmane finally made it onto the cover in September of 2020, which at that point he'd been making music for like 6 years. Meanwhile, No Jumper is getting millions and millions of views doing these like grimy YouTube interviews with these kids in the back room of his store. So clearly there was an appetite for coverage of these artists, but AP just missed that. Alternative Press should have been the ones doing all those interviews, but instead they were busy doing stuff like this quiz of which Ollie Sykes tattoo are you? I mean, with content like that, can we be surprised that their relevance fell off a cliff? It had been slowly kind of declining for a while, but I feel like last year is when they really were just like flailing for direction. They took a lot of heat for how they handled the Austin Carlisle situation, which is more than I can go into here. You can look it up, but people were not happy with that. Then it seemed like they kind of overcompensated by going super woke on their Instagram and trying to cancel a new band every couple days, which people were, again, not happy with. What is going on over there at AP? Like, where is this brand headed? What do they even want to be? And as a longtime fan, it was kind of a bummer to see. But with that said, it does seem like they're kind of regrouping a bit, starting to move away from relying on those same legacy artists a bit. Like, I see they've got Willow Smith on the cover of their new issue. The new edition of 100 Bands That You Need to Know has Rina Sawayama on the cover, so that is encouraging to see. But here's the big problem that they need to solve. Advertising on a website just does not pay as well as ads in a print magazine do. At least at the time that I was advertising with them, a full page ad in a magazine like AP is gonna cost you probably tens of thousands of dollars per month. And think about how many ads there are in that magazine and you get the sense of how much money they're making from those. Whereas to make $10,000 or $15,000 from advertising on a website, you're gonna need to get, probably somewhere between 3 and 5 million page views, I would guess, which is a lot. So think about how many page views you need to make up for the revenue that you would lose from a 100-page print magazine that's 30% ads, and you can see why they're tempted to just barf out this crappy clickbait content to get page views. And then put 9 ads on every page that make the website so slow and shitty that it's almost impossible to use. So what I'd like to see is for them to just kind of walk away from all of that. I'd like to see them shift away from like the blog advertising kind of model, more towards something like No Jumper or the Breakfast Club, both of which are doing great. I was on No Jumper a couple months ago. I got to take a look at it. Adam has a super cool setup, have this little office. He's got like, I think 6 or 7 full-time employees. He's killing it. And there is no reason that AP can't do the same, but even bigger and better. So if I was running the show over there, here is what I would do. Number 1, you got to pull the Band-Aid off and stop relying on all those legacy artists so much. I would declare like a 6-month moratorium on Panic at the Disco, Pierce the Veil, or My Chemical Romance. I understand that gets traffic with the audience you have right now, but you may need to take a little bit of short-term pain for long-term gain. There's definitely a place for legacy artists, but I think in order to reinvent themselves, they've really got to focus on the next generation, what's going on right now. For example, hyperpop and all the different kinds of like alternative rap and pop. And by the way, this is the exact challenge that I have. For me, videos about older nostalgic stuff like ska and nu metal are always the ones that do best in terms of views. But if I rely on that too much, then I become a nostalgia channel that can't talk about anything current. And so sometimes I have to choose to do stuff like making my hyperpop video, which didn't do nearly as well as something about nu metal, but I'm still glad that I did it because that helps position my channel as something that's about documenting now, not just the past. Number 2, I think they need to hire people who can be public personalities, not just like interchangeable faceless writers. They did this a little bit like when they were working with Nick Major for a while years ago. I think they need to do more of it because the media now is about individual creators of the point of view, not these kind of like faceless brands. People like Joe Rogan, Bill Simmons, academics, or Adam 22, not MTV and Rolling Stone. And so I would think about turning AP into something like an umbrella brand over all those personalities in the same way as that the Call Me Daddy podcast is about those two girls and the Breakfast Club is about Charlemagne, DJ Envy, and Angela Yee with that brand over the top. And one of those people could leave the show and get replaced by someone else, and the brand would still stay intact. And number 3, I would suggest trying to shift away from depending so much on advertising revenue, especially on the web. Because like I said, those ad-based models incentivize them to create more of that like crappy clickbait content like the Ollie Sykes tattoo quiz, because in order to make any kind of money, they need massive, massive amounts of traffic. And sadly, thoughtful, well done, highly researched pieces of content typically don't get a lot of traffic. So what I would suggest is that they try a subscription model like the New York Times has had so much success with. That's enabled them to kind of get away from playing the clickbait game that a lot of other people do. It's not going to replace ad revenue overnight, but it will slowly increase. And when you have that base of revenue coming in every month from subscribers, then you don't have to pander to page views and the algorithm so much, and they can get back to what made them great, which is in-depth, thoughtful coverage of artists and the culture. Now, with all of that being said, I want to just be super clear. It's very easy for me to say all of that here sitting on the sidelines, playing armchair quarterback. I'm sure there's a lot going on behind the scenes that I don't know about, so I don't want to be that guy and say like, now what you gotta do is. And like I said, I'm a huge fan of AP and still a supporter in spite of what I think are some of the missteps that they've made. So if anybody at AP happens to be watching this, please know that everything I said is coming from a good place. I'm in your corner. I would love to see the brand get back to where it was at its peak. In all seriousness, you guys know where to find me, so please feel free to reach out. Happy to help if I can, just bounce ideas around or whatever, because I am on Team AP.
Everywhere you guys look tonight, you are going to see the biggest names in rock right next to you, right over there.
That is right. If a terrorist group were to blow this place up right now, Papa Roach would have to headline Warped Tour next year.
All right, my friends, that does it for this video. Let me know what you think about AP and whether you think they'll be able to make a little bit of comeback, and if so, what that would look like to you. Before I let you go, as always, I would like to thank everyone who supports us on Patreon, especially those of you who support at the True Cult level or above. Patrons get every podcast a week early. There's a members-only private Discord server. I do Q&As. I've been doing some giveaways. There's a way to have me review your music or artwork or video or anything else that you would like to get my eyes or ears on. So if any of that sounds cool to you, you can join the Patreon at the link in the description. And with that, I'm going to sign off for now, but I will see you next time.